following account originates from a winter ledger kept by Mr. Elias Hargrave, clerk of a remote village whose name and location have since been lost to time. His entries detail the events of a brutal winter, though one record stands apart. A cautionary tale, meticulously documented. Hargrave's words suggest he intended it as a warning for future residents to heed the traditions surrounding the Lantern Keeper. The tragedy began the prior winter when Mrs. Agatha Bray, a widow of 38, lost her only son, Thomas, in a freak accident. Agatha and Thomas were newcomers to the settlement, having moved there after her husband's death in search of a stable life and opportunity for her son. However, that opportunity was never realized. A heavy storm had clogged the Bray hearth with snow and debris. In his eagerness to restore warmth, Thomas climbed onto the roof to clear the blockage. He slipped on the ice, falling headfirst into the narrow flue. The force broke his neck. He died instantly. The village rallied to recover Thomas's body. They worked in grim silence, eventually delivering the young man to his grieving mother. Thomas was given a proper burial, and though Agatha attended the funeral with her customary dignity, it was clear the loss had hollowed her. As was tradition in the village, each winter brought the arrival of a stranger, known only as the Lantern Keeper. Dressed in a heavy coat and hat that obscured his face, he carried with him a collection of lanterns crafted from thick glass and iron. For a modest offering, the Lantern Keeper would light one for each household, placing it by the doorway or in the nearest tree. It was said these lanterns kept the spirits of the dead at bay, ensuring peace through the dark months. Agatha, however, refused the Lantern Keeper's service. Mrs. Clarissa Hodge, a neighbor passing by the Bray home, later recounted overhearing the exchange. She described Agatha standing firmly in her doorway, questioning the Lantern Keeper as to why anybody would want to keep their loved ones away. What passed between them beyond this was not recorded in detail, save for the Lantern Keeper's final ominous warning. They are not the same when they come back. Agatha shut the door, and the Lantern Keeper moved on. His lanterns illuminated the rest of the village, casting faint halos through the endless snow. In the weeks that followed, villagers began to notice signs of Agatha's decline. Smoke never rose from her chimney, though she was seen at church, gaunt and shivering. Concerned, Mrs. Harriet Hargrave, the clerk's wife, decided to visit. Harriet found the Bray home colder than the air outside. Frost coated the inside of the windows, and the smell of soot lingered like a ghost in the dim light. Agatha sat by the empty hearth, clutching her shawl tightly, her lips cracked and pale. What Harriet recorded from their conversation formed the heart of her husband's account. At first, grief kept Agatha from lighting the fire. The sight of the empty hearth was too much, a hollow reminder of what had been taken from her. The thought of flames flickering where her son had fallen was unbearable. The cold crept in, wrapping around her like a shroud, but even that seemed a lesser torment than the memories. Eventually the winter grew too cruel. Her hands trembled as she struck the match, the tiny flames sputtering in the frigid air. When the fire finally took, she felt its warmth push back the cold. But then, faintly, she heard a soft whisper. It was Thomas's voice. It sounded scared, frightened, but she couldn't make out the words. In her shock, she dropped the match onto the cold stone of the hearth, and it extinguished. The whispers stopped. She struck another match, listening intently for Thomas's whispers, but heard nothing. In a few moments she had a kindling fire. That's when the whispers came again, no longer soft, but insistent, carrying a weight that cut through the crackling wood. It sounded as though it came from somewhere deep within the chimney. She froze, her heart pounding, as the faint voice grew clearer, sharper, like it was straining to be heard. The fire's glow felt wrong now, its warmth suffocating, rather than soothing. As the flames grew, so did the sound, escalating from an urgent cry to a raw, visceral scream, echoing off the walls of the small, empty home. With heavy sobs, she alternated between trying to warm her hands on the fire or holding them over her ears to block out the screams. She was convinced she was going mad, that her grief was overwhelming her, and that the only way out of this hell was through. But then she saw the shadow, a dark figure, reaching down from the throat of the chimney, absorbing the light of the flames. It crawled downward, dragging itself along the stones of the hearth. Its form disintegrated with each jerky movement, crumbling like ash disturbed by a gust of wind. Soot streaked the stones in its wake. She ran from the house and waited outside, shivering until the smoke stopped curling from her chimney. From that day forward, she hadn't dared to light the hearth again. Agatha, pale and shivering, recounted her experience in a disjointed rush, her voice barely rising above a whisper. Harriet listened, skeptical but uneasy, and resolved to light a fire despite Agatha's protests. The kindling caught quickly, and the flames roared to life, momentarily breaking the cold's grip on the room. For a moment, there was only the sound of crackling wood. Then Harriet thought she heard something, a faint scraping, like nails on stone, coming from the flue. She leaned closer, peering into the flickering glow, and her breath caught as she saw it. A hand, blackened and sooty, reaching downward with jerky, unnatural movements. In fright, Harriet ran from the house just as Agatha rushed forward, her face contorted in terror, to douse the flames with trembling hands. The clerk notes that his wife refused to ever return to the Bray house again. 3 days later, Agatha Bray was found dead in her home. Her body was discovered, slumped before the hearth, her hands blackened with soot. Kindling lay scattered around her, as though she had been preparing to light another fire. The details disturbed even the most stoic among the villagers. Agatha's mouth was smeared with soot, and when her body was moved, a fine black cloud erupted from her lips, spreading across the icy floor like ash from a long-dead flame. Additional records from this forgotten settlement note the peculiar tradition of hanging sturdy iron lanterns from their homes each winter. The practice, it seems, was diligently maintained until the village was abandoned, its last residents departing decades later. Thank you for visiting Archive 19. Your curiosity is appreciated. If you found this story intriguing, consider liking the video to help others uncover it as well. For more stories from obscure sources, subscribe to be notified when the next file is unearthed. New discoveries are released weekly.